A few years ago, when I desperately needed some extra cash for my studies and daily expenses, I started picking up house-sitting gigs around my neighborhood through word of mouth. It was simple work: feed the dog morning and night, water the indoor plants, collect the mail from the box and make sure everything stayed in order while the owners were out of town. Most of these jobs lasted just a weekend, or a full week at most when someone went on a family trip. I never thought twice about any of it, nor did I find anything strange, until a woman named Carol hired me to watch her house for 2 full weeks while she visited family out of state. Looking back, I never could have imagined that would be the last house-sitting job I would ever take, and to this day, whenever I think about that house, a cold shiver runs down my spine. Carol lived at the absolute end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It was the kind of isolated street where trees outnumbered houses and streetlights were practically non-existent, plunging the area into a heavy, suffocating silence once night fell. The houses sat far enough apart that you could spend an entire evening outside without seeing a single soul or catching a glimpse of a neighbor. Carol's house was older, neat and well kept, but it carried that distinct, heavy scent unique to older homes, a blend of heavy wood polish, aged carpets, and a fainter, lingering undertone of candle wax that refused to fade, no matter how many windows you threw open. Before leaving, she gave me a thorough tour of the place. She showed me where the food for her golden retriever, Biscuit, was kept, how to handle the ancient, moody thermostat that seemed to have a mind of its own, and which mail slot belonged to her versus the neighbors. Right near the end of the tour, as we reached the far end of the upstairs hallway, her tone shifted completely, turning sharp and serious. She told me very plainly that the room used to belong to her son, and she was simply not ready for anyone to step foot inside it. I didn't question her or push for answers. It wasn't my place. Besides, the door was secured from the outside by a heavy lock, so even if my curiosity got the better of me, there was no way to open it. The first few days passed exactly as I expected. During the day, I went about my normal routine, and in the evening I returned, fed Biscuit, sat quietly watching television in the living room, and eventually retired to the guest bedroom down the opposite end of the hallway. The atmosphere of the house felt completely normal. That all changed on the 4th night. As I lay in bed, hovering right on the edge of sleep, a strange sound drifted down from the far end of the hallway. A soft, rhythmic, repetitive thumping. It sounded like someone bouncing a small rubber ball against the wall. Thump. Pause. Thump. Pause. It was too steady and deliberate to be random settling noises or the wind. I lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just water pipes, expanding wood, or a draft rattling an old window frame. That same night, another disturbing thing happened. Biscuit, who routine-wise always slept right outside my guest room door, was nowhere near it. When I checked, I found him huddled at the absolute opposite end of the hallway, as far away from that locked door as the structure allowed. When I called out to him softly, he refused to move, shivering in the dark. As the days dragged on into the 2nd week, that nightly thumping became a regular, terrifying routine. It always started right around 11 o'clock and lasted for a solid hour, before fading into total silence before dawn. At first, I tried my best to ignore it, but you can only pretend not to hear something for so many nights before it wears you down. Finally, on one particular night, my curiosity completely overpowered my fear. I got out of bed and crept quietly down the dark hallway toward that forbidden door. The moment I stepped close to the door, the thumping stopped dead in its tracks. It didn't fade away gradually. It cut off instantly. as if whatever was making the noise realized I was standing right there outside and was holding its breath, listening to me. I stood frozen in the dark for what felt like eternity, my hand hovering right above the doorknob. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, screaming at me to walk away. Yet almost without my conscious consent, my fingers gripped the knob and turned it. To my absolute horror, it turned smoothly. The door swung open slightly. The lock wasn't engaged. I couldn't tell if Carol had simply forgotten to lock it when she left, or if there had never been a functional lock to begin with, and she had lied just to keep me away. I didn't dare open it any further. The thick, suffocating silence pouring out from inside that room felt alive, acutely aware of my presence. Overwhelmed by sheer dread, I backed away slowly, hurried back to the guest room, and lay awake until the first light of dawn broke through the window. 2 nights before Carol was scheduled to return home, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound that made my blood run cold. The locked door at the end of the hall was slowly swinging open on its own. Creak! The agonizing groan of the hinges echoed through the quiet house like a cinematic horror scene. I froze stiff in bed, terrified to move a muscle. Then I heard footsteps, light, careful, distinct footsteps moving down the hallway. They paused right outside my guest room door. I stared fixedly at the thin strip of darkness beneath the door, fully expecting a shadow to stretch across it. After several agonizing minutes, the footsteps resumed, moving toward the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator door open and gently close. A moment later, the footsteps padded softly back down the hall, followed by the unmistakable sound of that bedroom door swinging shut and clicking firmly into place from the inside. Biscuit spent the remainder of that night pressed tightly against my legs, trembling uncontrollably. When Carol finally came home, I told her everything that had happened over those 2 weeks, expecting her to look at me like I was insane. Instead, the color drained completely from her face. She sat down slowly at the kitchen table and stayed silent for a long time before speaking. Her son had passed away in that room years prior, she explained, and during his final months of a long illness, confined mostly to his bed, one of the few things he could do to pass the endless hours was bounce a small rubber ball against the wall over and over again. She thanked me generously for staying out the full term, but she never asked me back. Some things are better left unasked, no matter how badly you want to know the truth. One of the greatest perks of my university was that its main library stayed open 24 hours a day during finals week. This meant that if you needed a quiet, isolated space to study at 3 in the morning, that building was your only refuge, occupied solely by a handful of desperate students scattered across different floors and a tired security guard making rounds every hour. During the finals of my junior year, I spent countless late nights tucked away on the 4th floor near the old periodical section, a remote corner where nobody ever seemed to venture. However, during the finals week of that specific semester, things took a deeply unsettling turn, and by the time the week concluded, I had sworn off studying on that floor forever, regardless of how quiet or convenient it was. Usually, I was completely alone up there, or at least far enough from anyone else that their presence didn't matter. I had grown accustomed to the peculiar silence of an empty library late at night, the low, steady hum of fluorescent overhead lights, the occasional settling groan of the aging building against the cold, and the distant, muffled ding of the elevator moving between floors when another exhausted student finally gave up and went home. Then, one night right around 2 a.m., I heard someone in the adjacent aisle pulling heavy books off the shelves and sliding them back, moving in a slow, unhurried rhythm. At first, I assumed another student was frantically hunting down research materials, but the sound persisted continuously for nearly 20 minutes without a single pause for actual reading or flipping through pages. Eventually, the sheer oddity of it got the better of me, and I got up from my desk to see who else was sharing the floor. When I rounded the corner into that aisle, it was completely empty. Not a single soul in sight. Yet at least a dozen books sat pulled halfway out from the shelving units, resting at odd, unnatural angles as if someone had frozen mid-motion and instantly vanished into thin air. I tried to brush it off, thinking another student might have gotten embarrassed or spooked by something mundane, and bolted. I pushed the books back into alignment, returned to my desk, and tried to force my focus back onto my notes. Roughly an hour later, the exact same sound started up again, this time coming from the aisle directly behind my chair. I spun around instantly, fast enough that if anyone had been lingering there, I would have caught them red-handed. Nobody was there, but once more, several books had been dragged halfway from the shelves, and one thick volume lay wide open face down on the floor. Staring up from the page was a single word, heavily underlined in pencil with such intense pressure that the graphite had nearly torn straight through the paper. The word was leave. Without wasting another second, I shoved all my belongings into my backpack, bolted for the elevator, and rode it straight down to the ground floor to find the security guard at his desk. I told him breathlessly that someone else was up on the 4th floor. He checked his access log and shook his head, informing me that my name was the only one logged for that floor all night. I had been entirely alone. When I mentioned the displaced books and the terrifying message, his expression hardened. He shared a grim piece of campus lore I hadn't heard during my 3 years there. The 4th floor had been sealed off for months a couple of years prior after a student was found dead up there during the late-night finals prep, having suffered an unexpected heart attack at his desk before a janitor discovered him during early morning sweeps. The library eventually reopened the space, but the security team still occasionally received reports from terrified students claiming books moved on their own late at night during finals week. For the remainder of that semester, I studied exclusively in the crowded, noisy main lobby, no matter how distracting it was. I never stepped foot on the 4th floor again, and from then on, whenever finals rolled around, I made damn sure I was packed up and gone long before 2 a.m. struck. When my grandmother passed away after a long and exhausting battle with her declining health, our family went through the standard, emotionally draining and agonizingly tedious process of sorting through her belongings in her damp, cluttered house. Relatives gathered in her old dust-covered living room under heavy, grief-stricken silences that were frequently broken by rising tensions, as some family members bickered aggressively over petty material items of little real value, while others quietly wept in the corners over objects holding deep, sentimental weight. Her older, beat-up smartphone ended up in my hands, almost by accident. Mostly because nobody else wanted the absolute hassle of wiping an outdated device, dealing with its locked accounts and setting it up from scratch. It was a severely dated model, lacking any modern flair or decent processing speed, kept around by her purely out of comfort, familiarity, and stubborn habit, completely filled with her old, unread text message threads, forgotten draft notes, and apps she barely knew how to navigate. Figuring it could serve as a reliable emergency backup device if my main phone ever died unexpectedly, I took it home with the firm intention of factory resetting it and clearing out whatever digital remnants, photos, and memories she had left behind. The factory reset went smoothly, wiping away all her old contacts, photo galleries, text message logs, and personal data until the system was entirely clean and functioning like new. I signed in with my own basic Google account, tossed the phone into a cluttered kitchen drawer filled with miscellaneous junk, and promptly forgot it existed for weeks. A few weeks later, my primary smartphone suffered a sudden, catastrophic motherboard failure and died completely in the middle of the evening while I was in the middle of important work. Desperate for a temporary replacement while waiting weeks for insurance repairs and shipping, I dug my grandmother's old phone out of the dark drawer, plugged it into a charger, and fired it up to get me through the next few days. As the screen flickered to life, displaying its familiar old startup logo and outdated user interface, I felt a strange, unexplainable chill crawl up my arms and settle in my chest, though I brushed it off immediately as mere nighttime fatigue and stress. The first truly strange occurrence happened roughly 3 days into using it as my daily driver, while I was sitting alone in my bedroom late at night, with all the lights turned off except for the dim, sickly glow of my desk lamp. A text message popped up unexpectedly on the screen from an unknown, unlisted number, containing just 3 chilling, italicized words. "I miss you." There was no sender name, no profile picture, 0 contact history, and absolutely no context to explain who it could possibly be from or how they reached this device. Assuming it was simply a wrong number sent to a newly recycled contact or an automated misdial from a spam network, I dismissed it entirely, cleared the notification from the status bar, and went back to what I was doing. Yet that brief, 3-word message left a heavy, lingering knot of pure unease in the pit of my stomach that refused to dissolve no matter how much I tried to rationalize it. The following night, precisely around the same exact hour, another text dropped onto the glowing screen from that exact same mysterious number. "Why don't you visit anymore?" A strange wave of cold unease washed over me, and sudden annoyance flared up inside my chest. Deciding I'd had enough of these weird late-night pranks or misdirected messages from a stranger, I tapped dial to call the number back directly, planning to tell whoever was behind it to stop messaging the wrong person once and for all. It rang twice, before abruptly disconnecting with a sharp click, followed immediately by an automated robotic voice stating flatly through the earpiece, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Sitting there in total darkness with the dead, silent phone pressed tightly to my ear, the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. A few nights later, over dinner, as the ceiling fan creaked overhead and the house remained dead silent, I casually mentioned the bizarre text to my mother as a weird coincidence to break the heavy silence. But the moment I spoke those specific details aloud, the color vanished completely from her face, leaving her staring at me in absolute, petrified shock. She asked me with an intense, trembling urgency to read out the exact phone number showing on the screen right then and there. When I recited the sequence of digits straight from my call history, she froze completely, her fork stopping midway to her mouth, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror. She told me with a shaking voice that the number belonged to my grandmother's old landline, one she had disconnected years prior, back when she lived in her original, secluded house, long before moving into the modern apartment where she eventually spent her final years. I tried desperately to rationalize it as a technical glitch, a recycled telecom sequence, a crossed line, or an automated spam bot with terrible timing, refusing to let my mind wander anywhere darker or supernatural. But the messages kept arriving every single night, right around the exact same hour without fail, reiterating how much she missed me, questioning why I hadn't come by to see her, and asking when I was finally going to return to her side. The frequency and the eerie precision of the timing made it impossible to keep brushing it off as a mere coincidence. Every night at that exact hour, the phone would vibrate against the wooden bedside table like a frantic heartbeat calling out from across the grave. Then, one specific night during a violent, raging thunderstorm, when lightning flashed violently against the bedroom window panes and heavy thunder shook the walls of the house, the message changed entirely, carrying a single sentence that froze the blood straight in my veins. I'm still in the room at the end of the hall. My grandmother's old house, the very first home she had abandoned years ago, had a room at the very end of the upstairs hallway that always remained permanently locked with a heavy deadbolt, even when the rest of the house was open to everyone. None of us grandkids were ever allowed anywhere near it, and nobody in the family had ever dared to ask what lay hidden inside that dark, forbidden space, wrapped as it was in family rumors, whispers, and absolute silence. I couldn't go check even if I wanted to, as that house had been sold long ago to complete strangers living entirely separate lives miles away across the city. Shaken to my absolute core, and feeling completely sick to my stomach as the storm raged fiercely outside, I grabbed the phone that very night, wiped it completely clean a second time through the system settings, powered it down for good, and buried it deep at the bottom of a heavy kitchen drawer beneath layers of old junk and forgotten papers, vowing never to touch or look at it again. Even now, sitting alone in the quiet of the night with the shadows stretching across my room, I sometimes feel the sudden, terrifying urge to pull that phone out from the dark drawer and see if those messages are still coming through across the void. But I've never had the courage to turn it back on. Some secrets are best left buried right where you put them. If you enjoyed this chilling story, hit that like button and subscribe for more horror content.